Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
We're very excited. We have a big day tomorrow.
What's the my
Wow. So big mazel tov to the Kaplan family on Hannah's bat mitzvah. We could give the same speech again tomorrow because we'll have more to say tomorrow. So we're about Hadras Melech. In Hannah's Haftarah, she's going to read tomorrow, we have the birth of Samson. Samson, he was famous, he had long hair. There was a story, there was a boy, his father was a rabbi, and he said, Dad, I got my learner's permit. Maybe you let me borrow the car sometimes. He said, you know what? I'd like to, but I want you to earn it, so I want you to do three things. I want you to improve your grades in school, devote 20 minutes a day to studying the Talmud more than you've been doing, and get a haircut. Those three things as well. So, the first two he did, he came back, but he didn't get his haircut. So his father said, he said, the son asked, could I borrow the car? He said, well, I told you the other two things I see you did, but you didn't get a haircut. He said, well, Pop, Samson, he had long hair. And you look at all the pictures they show, Noah with long hair, Moses with long hair. So I want to emulate them. He said, very good, they walked everywhere too. They didn't try. So,
when you drive, you guys will get it.
So,
it will be never too much.
Eventually, times change, different things. There's controversy right now. It's not a new thing. Different communities have different rules of driving and things. But people ask, what's going on in the world? And it made some controversy now in London, but it's nothing new under the sun. And to me, it's not really. I really embrace a live and let live attitude in a lot of things, and I think more people should. And I think that's a message that we can bear out in certain ways from this parsha, but in certain ways not. There's the world is a certain way. If you look in the old movies, there was Laurel and Hardy, and Oliver Hardy used to play with his tie like this. That was his trademark. How did that happen? Where did he pick that up? Now, at first, Laurel and Hardy weren't a team. They were comedians in silent movies, and they were separate, and eventually they teamed up, and they became a comedy team. So there was one film that Oliver Hardy was in before he teamed up with Stan Laurel, and he was a sailor swapping the deck, and he decided what would be a really funny joke if he'd take his tie and he'd blow his nose in his tie. But then he realized, as he was about to do it, the censors wouldn't stand for that. And that's, film was very expensive. It wasn't now we have digital and you can just go back and, erase it. That film was expensive, and if that got cut out, they didn't want to take more than one take, in those movies in those days. If Max said it, if there was a fire somewhere down the street, he would run and go take a film with a fire and then make a story about it later, just because he didn't want to waste a good opportunity. It shouldn't happen when it's done. That's what it was in those days. There was a certain sense of morality that who would think it's vulgar to blow your nose? To blow your nose in a tie. It's maybe a little gross, but that wouldn't get even cut out of a G-rated movie these days. Go a little forward in history, another 20 years or so. Charlie Chaplin made the famous movie The Great Dictator. He was so frightened. What are they going to take out? The censors, they were always on his case, and he was a little bit, edgy for his time. What are they going to take out? The only thing that the censors took out, he wrote in his autobiography, was the word lousy. That was considered a vulgar word in 1940, according to the Hays Code then. Go another 15 years later, television, I Love Lucy. They couldn't use the word pregnant. That was considered a vulgar word. They had to say expecting. It was a word that wasn't allowed to be. Rashi brings a medrash in this week's parsha. We ask, we look around at the world. A friend of mine, he said, he grew up in Far Rockaway, went to yeshiva together, and he said, In his house, his parents didn't have a television. Later, they got one, but when he was growing up, didn't have it. He always said this to parents, "You grew up with TV. Why can't I have?" So they said, when we were growing up, it was Leave It to Beaver and the Lone Ranger, but this garbage that's on now, I'm not going to let you watch. And that was 20 years ago. You can make an extrapolation to what's going on now. So people wonder, where did this come from? And in general, we see in the religious worlds, all different religions, but we see in the Jewish world, things that didn't used to be, people are taking a lot more seriously or more strict. Used to be, never heard of such a thing, glad kosher. It's so extreme, and now it's pretty standard. I would say the majority of kosher meat today is glad. It's hard to find not glad kosher. There's a few, there's Hebrew National, it's totally kosher, it's not glad, but it became a standard. Other things like that, like I said, why did this family, they didn't have a television, where does this come from? So the answer we have, like I said, Rashi brings a medrash, because the Torah talks about the sota, woman who was accused of impropriety, but there was no witnesses. So there was no proof, they didn't know what to do. So it was a whole thing. They had to write a scroll and get it erased in water, and she had to drink the water. And if she was guilty, she was punished by drinking that water. That water made her die from it. And if not, then she would be blessed from it, if she was innocent. And that was that law, and it was a whole process, and the Talmud goes through a whole process of what someone went through if that had to happen, and there's certain sensitivities that were brought into it. And then right after that, another set of laws of the Nazarite. Like we mentioned, Samson, he was a Nazarite. Nazarites, they didn't cut their hair, they didn't drink wine, they didn't even eat grapes or grape seeds or anything from grapes they couldn't eat. They couldn't go to cemeteries, all kinds of things they couldn't do. They took these oaths, and it would be for at least 30 days, sometimes it would be longer, and at the end they would bring sacrifices. And Rashi says there, Misha Roa as a sota v'kukulusa, that someone who sees this woman being embarrassed by virtue of this whole process of the sota, which is indicative of the society being in a downward spiral, he should take an oath to stay away from wine, because that getting drunk, that could cause these kind of problems. Takes away the inhibitions, and then could make problems like this. So take an extra step to be careful. So I would venture to say it's a similar thing in this world. We don't have today the laws of the Nazarite because we don't have the temple. So when the Nazarite finished his oath, the 30 days or however long, he would have to bring a sacrifice and he'd be exempt from it. Except Samson was the one exception to that. He had to keep it for his whole life. But in general, a Nazarite would be for a brief period of time and then go back. And in those days, wine, that was the classic drink. That was what everyone drank. That would be like saying, I'm not going to drink Coca-Cola. It's separating. And not only that, so he couldn't go to a wedding, couldn't go to a bar mitzvah, couldn't go to a bris, also couldn't go to a funeral, because he couldn't. So the Nazarites had to make their own society, separate from everyone else. And it actually says in the Talmud that in the time of the Second Temple, there were hundreds and thousands of people who took these oaths and would then bring their sacrifices at the end, the pigeons and the doves, that would be brought after that was finished. There was, the different commentaries discuss how there was even a whole group, they were known as Nazarites, that they went and they left the city. Why? Because in the time of the Second Temple, the society was not the greatest, and so they ran away. They went into the desert and hid, and they had nothing to do with the big city. But nowadays we don't have that. There was a rabbi 80 years ago or something, he passed away 30, 40 years ago, who took the Nazarite oath and he just kept it his whole life because there's no temple, so he couldn't get out of it once he took it. But in general, it's frowned upon. We can't do that today, but you don't need to. People, they see, it's since the rest of the world has gone in a direction that's not so good. So certain people might feel they don't trust themselves enough. They have to go an extreme the other way. But there's nothing wrong with it, but we have to recognize, we can't judge them for being too strict. And also those who want to be more strict shouldn't judge those who are less strict, because there's nothing wrong with the other side either. Nothing wrong with drinking wine, nothing wrong with going to a cemetery, nothing wrong with all these things, nothing wrong with cutting your hair. All these things could be good. All these things could be mitzvahs. You make kiddush on wine. So what did they do if they didn't have wine? How did they make kiddush? All these things that they're losing out on by taking these oaths, by going beyond. But the thing is that also, if we, so we gave the example, this friend of mine, he said his parents didn't have a television because they want that extra mile, like the same thing, like they didn't want to have, but the same thing, if we do have a television, we have to figure out how to sanctify it, use it in a holy way. It could be in a holy way in a simple way. Just by virtue of the simple fact you watch a show you like, it's funny, or it has a nice music, or a nice story, and it makes you feel good. Say to God, thank you for that experience. Because God, you created my eyes and my ears, and all my faculties, and all the people who produce this, and I'm recognizing you in this, and that way, something you enjoy, wherever it is you enjoy, it doesn't have to be television, whatever it is you go and you enjoy, you can sanctify it by thanking God for this great experience you enjoy, whatever pastimes you enjoy. As long as it's not your whole life, of course. Well, if a person just has pastimes, it doesn't go to work, they lose out. The same thing, a person could be an alcoholic and they lose out. So everyone has and it's a disease. It's not, it's something, that's that people have to be careful of. And then, Yazar Satzbim Niyayim. But so, either way, and actually, what I thought of is perhaps we could say is that the simple meaning of that is Yazar Atzmim Niyayim, that a person could be a Nazirite and decide he's going to be separated from wine. But the word Nazir means a crown. It could mean the other way. Yazar Atzmim Niyayim, he could make himself a crown with the wine, meaning with the things of the world. If he sees the society is in a downward turn, he has two choices, and they both are the same thing. He could abstain and take it and stay away from the whole world because he doesn't trust himself enough. Or he could be in the world but be careful to do things in the right way, not to do the wrong things in the world, be careful not to fall, and use the world, Yazar Sasvei Minayayin, from that wine to be lifted up and to be crowned, from those things to recognize how to use it responsibly, to be responsible. And so I think that's really the message there that comes from this message, and that's why all these things, that we see in the world, that there is this turn to extremism if it's done in the right way, and with respect, and without judging other people, recognizing everyone has their own things. The Rebbe Bzusha, the Holy Rebbe Bzusha of Anapoli, he lived about 200 years ago. He's buried in the Ukraine. He was a very humble person and a very colorful character and a great holy man. And he explained the passage that we have in Ethics of the Fathers in Pirkei Avot. It says that Boshes panim legan eden, v'azei panim legehinnom. That someone who is meek goes to heaven, and someone who's bold or arrogant goes to hell. The simple meaning is meekness is good and arrogance is bad. But there's a way to use pride in a good way. So if someone is meek and they don't think they can hold back, stay in heaven. Don't leave the synagogue. Don't leave the Beis Medrash. Don't leave your little shtetl, because you can't survive outside of that. But if you have that pride of who you are, you could go into the world. You could be in the world and not get lost. And certain people need this way and certain people need that way. And not one is right and one is wrong. It means you could go out even to the depths of hell and bring out the holiness there. Not to say that it's a punishment, just opposite. You can light up and bring that light and turn the hell into heaven if you do it the right way. And that's the way that we have to approach things, is to recognize everyone has their own role in the world. And if we approach that in a peaceful way, that brings blessings. Because what's right after the Nazarite is a priestly blessing. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord shine His face to you and be gracious to you. May the Lord show favor to you and give you peace. That message of peace, what we just said, Hashem oz lamo yitain Hashem yivorech ha'amo v'ashalom. The Lord gives strength to His people. That same word, that azus, that pride, He gives pride to His people. And He blesses His people with peace. That through peace comes the blessings. The very last passage of the Talmud ends with that verse from the Psalms that we read, that the Lord blesses His people with peace. It says that God looked through the whole world, everything He created, and He wanted to find what kind of vessel can hold blessing. And the only thing He could find was peace. That through peace, which comes, as we read a few weeks ago, if you walk in my statutes and go in my ways and follow the Torah, then I'll give peace in the land. That peace comes through Torah, and that peace brings blessings, and that's the blessings that we're looking forward to. You know, blessings are you can't take blessings lightly. You know, there's a Yiddish saying that if you need a thief, you cut him down from the gallows if he can help you with some kind of problem you have. So they said that during the Holocaust, there was 24 rabbis who they managed to escape Germany, and they came to Italy, and it seemed like they were home free, except, Mussolini, even though he wasn't Hitler, he was his ally with Axis powers. So he was ready to send these rabbis back to Germany, and that would have been the end of them. And some rabbis who made it to America, who had escaped, heard one who was American and one who escaped, they heard what happened. They said, how can we get these rabbis who are in Italy, how can we save their lives? So who has power in Italy? They'll go to the mafia. That's what they'll go to. So they went to, there was a mob boss, they called him Joe Bananas. His name was Banano, but that was his nickname, was Joe Bananas. And they went to him and to see, what could we do to save these rabbis? So they approached him. They went, Rabbi Cutler, who was the dean in Lakewood. He didn't speak English, but he was a giant of Torah and a very righteous and holy man, but also a genius beyond. And he went with Rabbi Irving Bunin, who was someone who worked hard to help people a lot. And they went together to this Joe Bananas. And they said, they said what they needed. We need to save the lives of these 24 rabbis from Italy. What do we need to do to save them? So then he asked this mob boss. He looked at this rabbi and he felt there's something. This is not just a regular person. This man with this white beard and this black hat here. There's something. Who is he? He said, well, he's the leader of the Jewish people. He said, like the whole Jewish people? He said, yeah. He's pretty much one of the biggest rabbis, maybe the biggest, that we have. So he said, all right, all I want from him is a blessing. You don't need to give me money, nothing. I just want the rabbi should give me a blessing. So then he didn't understand English, so he asked him to translate. So he said, Rabbi, Dr. Brocha, he needs a blessing. I said, Zog him, he'll have a lange Leben, tell him he'll have a long life, and he'll starve in sein Bett. So then he'll die in his bed. That's what he says. He should be blessed with a long life, he should die in his bed. Meaning, so when he heard that, he realized it means he's not going to die getting shot in the street, that he'll live a long life, and the fact was, he lived to be 98 years old, this Joe Bananas. That was when he retired, his kids came to Lakewood Yeshiva, and when he heard that blessing, he said, all right, those rabbis are saved, and they got saved. That's how he saved their lives. So when he retired, his kids came to Lakewood, and they said, we want to talk to Rabbi Cutler. So then his son, who was the next dean, now his grandson's the dean, he came out, and he said, they said, well, how can I help you? They said, well, your father gave our father a big blessing. We want the same blessing. He said, Yeah, but I'm not as holy as my dad. You know, he was also a very special holy person, but he was also pretty humble, so he didn't want to. But he said, "All right, I wish whatever blessings, but I can't give any guarantees." The same way. So the thing is we should be blessed. You know, if we should try to do things in the right way, and you know, hopefully we don't have to go to those type of places, but. To get, and hopefully we're not finding ourselves in so many difficult situations. And, you know, we want to wish Hannah and the whole Kaplan family, you know, blessings of peace and Torah. It's such a pride to our community to see a family who's so dedicated, the whole family, 3 girls and the parents. It's really, you know, it's what my wife always says, and Richard always says, we were so impressed by this family, you know, to have here in Rock Hill, New York. And so we wish you a big mazel tov and a lot of blessings and peace and good things. And continue now.
And we get the blessing.